The following program is a presentation of Grace Communion International and Grace Communion Seminary and is made possible by generous donations from viewers like you. On this episode of You're Included, Professor Stephen Siemens discusses the practical implications of Orthodox doctrines, and his book, Give Them Christ. Our host is Michael Morrison.
Now, Steve, you've been a pastor, but you describe yourself as a practical theologian. To some people, that seems like a contradiction of terms. That theology doesn't seem very practical. How do you see theology as practical for the church?
Well, Mike, I don't think I would be teaching this stuff if I didn't think it was practical. In fact, sometimes I say to my students, the reason I love theology is because it is so practical. That's why theology arose in the church in the first place, not so that academicians and theoreticians could sit around, discussing and fine-tune ideas. It was out of the life of the church, protecting false doctrine from true doctrine. It was so that you could disciple people when they came to faith in Christ. You had to tell them about what they believed and what you believed as Christians, and you also had how do you evangelize without being able to talk to someone about the faith? So those are the kinds of things. So it's about nurturing. It's about bringing people to faith. Those are the things that theology is about. So it's really practical, and it's supposed to undergird everything that we do in ministry.
I noticed in your book, Give Them Christ, that you talk about how it's not just a what, but a so what.
Right.
And you're trying to bring out some practical implications of doctrines instead of just trying to prove that, well, Jesus became flesh. Yeah, then you try to answer, well, so what? What difference does that make for us?
Right, and I think in this particular book, Mike, I was really concerned that pastors help understand. We teach them a lot about the what while they're in school, and most of them get that, they understand it. But when they become pastors and preachers of churches, what people really want to know is, well, so what? Jesus became flesh and dwelt among us. So what? What difference does that make? And so in this book, I was trying to help them move from the what to the so what. And that's where I think doctrine really gets exciting and inspiring when we begin to think about, well, what difference does this really make?
Maybe, comment on the Incarnation. Well, it's nice that Jesus became a human, but then there's the so what. What is the difference does it make to me in my job or in my marriage,
right.
Day-to-day life?
Well, I think one of the great and foundational human questions that people have asked for centuries is does God really care? Does God really care, or is God just sort of far removed somewhere? Did He create this and just pull away from it? But the Incarnation means that He came and actually became one of us so that He could get next to us and so that He could understand what it feels like to be human, not in just a theoretical kind of sense, but He walked in our shoes. There's a poet, I think William Blake, that says, "Now think not thou canst sigh a sigh, and thy Maker is not by. Think not thou canst shed a tear, and thy Maker is not near." I mean, Jesus has become one, eyeball to eyeball, heart to heart. He knows what it's like to be human, to be lonely. He knows what it's like to get angry sometimes about things, to feel sorrow. He wept at the grave of his friend Lazarus, and he saw what it was doing to those, And so that fundamental human question, does God care, I think has been answered for us in that He became flesh and dwelt among us. As Eugene Peterson puts it, in his translation of that verse, John 1:14, he moved into our neighborhood. He got next to us, and so
Right.
that, and I now I know that, and I can never be the same because of that. I know that he knows.
Right, we could. I was thinking of his struggle in Gethsemane,
Yeah,
where he's not just faking this,
right.
going through motions, but it was something
And he
internal.
felt, at times
real.
we felt God forsaken. We felt all alone. And he cried out, "My God, why have you forsaken me?" He's felt that as well.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Philip Yancey wrote a book on where is God when it hurts. You know,
Right.
where is he?
Well,
where is he?
Yeah, he's in the middle of it. He understands. You know, he is the fellow sufferer, says Alfred North Whitehead, who understands. And he can understand. So that when I come to him, I'm not coming to somebody that's aloof, far removed, has no clue. That's good news, it seems to me.
So that we can see his life and learn something about our own life at the same time.
Yes, that's another thing about the significance of the Incarnation. First of all, it's really a compliment to humanity in the sense that God says, I want to become one of you. I choose to take on flesh and dwell among you. What higher compliment could you give to humanity than to say, I want, that's how much you mean to me. I join myself to you. And also Jesus comes to reveal, I think, to us what it really means to be fully human. His, in him we see, and we don't just hear someone talking about what it's supposed to look like. You know, others might come and give you a discourse on the dignity of labor, but here's someone that comes and works in a carpenter shop with his hands. And so he embodies that for us. We see it. We get a person-to-person vision of that, which I think speaks to us more than any other. We need that as human beings. You know, that's how communication is best done. But we see in him the embodiment of what it means to be human. You know, what it means to love, what it means to be free. You know, versus, and we also see, of course, the revelation of God. What's God like? That's another great human question, isn't it? And for us Christians, it's really not what is God like, it's more, is God Christ-like? And in the face of Christ, we see him.
So Jesus is showing both humanity and God.
Right.
And so we expect God to look like humanity?
Not exactly. He actually embodies both, but actually he does suggest, I think, that God's plan is that you and I might share in the life of God. You know, that you and I might become joined to God and raised, you might say, as a result of that.
You're saying he's showing us true humanity, and he, as a true human, shared in the life of God,
right? And
that we can also,
right,
through him.
Through him, and he's the he's the pioneer. The writer of the book of Hebrews says, you know, he's the forerunner of what that new humanity is supposed to look like, that lives in God and dwells in God and walks with God. We, you know, didn't work out so well with Adam. We turned away from that original plan that God had for us, and he's kind of reinstituting that, isn't he?
Romans describes him as another Adam. Humanity is started again in this model,
right,
rather than the old one.
The second Adam, right, yeah.
And Jesus can show us what it means to live a human life in dependence on God.
Right.
In a way that we couldn't see in the Old Testament, from God speaking on Mount Sinai, for example. Maybe that's where people got the idea of the aloof God. He's just far off and we couldn't relate.
Yeah, I think God had to establish those boundaries and to show us, first of all, that I'm not one of you. You know, we have such a propensity to make God in our own image, and that propensity to idolatry, you know, sort of to bring God down to our level, and God was teaching his people all along that, no, you can't do that. You know, there's this appropriate distance. But then in the New Testament, when Jesus comes, he comes near,
On one side he says, I'm not one of you, and the next time he says, I can become
right,
one of you.
One of you,
And he kind of blesses us with his presence.
Right.
But he also, as a human, we see his struggles with pain, sorrow, sin, suffering. I mean, he didn't sin himself, but he could deal with it, or he did deal with it. Why didn't he just, he stopped it for some people. Why didn't he just stop it for everybody?
Suffering?
Yeah.
Well, God's method for dealing with suffering, I think our basic human inclination is to think, well, God ought to get rid of it. Suffering, and truly suffering is suffering. It's awful. It's not, but God's way of dealing with suffering is a little different, I think. At least the Christian vision of that. Simone Weil said that the extreme greatness of Christianity is not that it looks for a remedy for suffering, but a divine use for suffering. And so what God does in Christ is he enters into suffering himself. He chooses to become one with us in our suffering, takes it into himself, you might say, on the cross. In his human nature, he suffers, and he cries out, my God, why? And then, as a result of that, he's able to redeem suffering, and now uses it for the redemption of the world. It's a different vision of suffering. Doesn't solve all the problems related to the problem of suffering. There's still a lot of whys that we ask about why certain things happen to us, why things happen in our world, why there's so much suffering. Now we know the end of the story says there's going to be a time when there's no more tears and no more pain. But God seems to be in the business of being more interested in redeeming it, in using it for his purposes, than just simply seeking to eliminating it and protecting us from it.
I appreciate what you say, that there will always be these why questions.
Right.
We don't always know why, but we're having a different perspective on it, of how this can be used for some good.
Right. And also just knowing that he enters into suffering. That he's been there. That he's been there, That doesn't make the problem necessarily go away, but it's sometimes when you can't trace God's hand, you can trust his heart. And I think it helps us to trust God's heart, to know that he's one with us in our suffering. I think of Johnny Erickson Tada, who, as probably many know, has been a quadriplegic since she was 17 as a result of a diving accident, and talks about how when your husband's just left you, when your son has committed suicide, when you've just become a quadriplegic, trying to figure out reasons and answers is pointless, she says. At a point like that, she says, the only answer that satisfies is the man of sorrows. And someday we'll get a full answer, but until then, she says, the man of sorrows is enough. To know that God enters into that and doesn't keep himself from suffering, you might say, that speaks to our heart, even though it may not answer all of our questions about the enigma of suffering.
Right, even the symbol of Christianity is a cross.
It's the cross,
is
right.
a reminder
Right.
of not just simple suffering, but excruciating,
right,
tremendous. And so there's a kind of a practical significance of what we see there. And it could be a doctrine, could become sterilized, but yet there's a practical result as we understand what was going on there in the crucifixion.
Right.
That can help us be encouraged, I guess.
Right.
Doesn't take our suffering away.
Right.
But realize that we're sharing in, as Paul described, we're sharing in the sufferings of Christ.
I've found, as I have sometimes shared with people about Christ and His suffering, and help them to kind of reframe their suffering in the light of His greater suffering, their afflictions in the light of His greater affliction, then it seems like that reframing helps them to put their suffering in a perspective that they couldn't before, and it's profoundly comforting, even though it doesn't solve the mystery.
The suffering is still there.
Exactly. Yeah.
And it's not just that Jesus suffered more than we did.
Right.
But He suffered with purpose.
Right.
And somehow we can participate in that purpose as well.
Yeah, I like to think that just as His scars, His nail-scarred hands, His scars have become radiant now, radiant scars. And it's interesting that He has a glorified body, but He still has the scars. Those marks of His suffering are there, and they seem like that they're always going to be there. That even when John looks and sees the lion, he doesn't see a lion, he sees a lamb as though it had been slain. So even in heaven, as it were, in His vision of heaven, Jesus still has those scars, but now they're radiant scars, and it seems like that in our lives, God can take the suffering, our scars, and if we'll give them to Him, He can work to transform and redeem. And then our scars become radiant too, and useful for the redemption of others.
Reminds me of in the Gospel of John. John talks about, or says Jesus refers to His crucifixion as His glorification. But that is part of His glory.
Yeah.
That He was willing to sacrifice.
Suffering and glory are bound up together in the Christian vision, and this is just kind of really counterintuitive and mind-boggling, and just not the way our culture tends to view suffering at all. Suffering is something to be eliminated. You've got a headache, you take a couple of Tylenol or whatever, you get rid of it. That's what we would think, and so we assume that that's what a loving God would do, eliminate suffering. But God's thoughts and ways are different. He wants to work and use suffering actually, this cross becomes the means of redeeming the world.
Right. Whereas our suffering can't redeem the world.
No, it can't. But it can be used redemptively in our lives, and in the lives of others, can't it? I mean, in the sense that that God can take a person, for example, who's been through the wrenching pain of a divorce, and bring them out, and then they become someone that God uses to minister to other people who are going through a divorce. And, so that doesn't get wasted, as it were, And I had a woman several years ago in Canada share about how God had taken the garbage in her life, the suffering, the pain, the things that she kind of wished that had never happened. And the garbage had sort of become like a compost pile. You throw garbage in a compost pile, rotten eggs and banana peels and leaves and, just whatever, coffee grinds. And she said, a year from now, she and her husband had just made a compost pile. When we go about the business of fertilizing in our garden and, around the shrubs and all, she said, there won't be any fertilizer you can buy anywhere that'll be as near as good as that compost. And she said, it will be like pure gold. And I thought, that's what God seems to want to do with our garbage. He can take it, if we'll give it to Him, and actually use it and turn it somehow into gold.
Or we want to get rid of it, but He wants us to keep it.
Right.
And
Paul, of course,
He'll transform it.
With his thorn in the flesh. Paul, Paul said, take it away. And he prayed, and he knew it was he said it's a messenger of Satan. Obviously, it was not a good thing, whatever it was. But God says, no, I want to use that, because in your weakness, my strength is made perfect. And so then Paul says, I glory in that now. That's a pretty counterintuitive vision for the average American today, isn't it?
Right. In your book, you mentioned that the apostles preached the gospel backwards. It was an intriguing phrase. Maybe comment a little bit more. What's backwards about this, the way the apostles preached?
We used to think of Jesus' life, death, and resurrection. And what I meant by that was, particularly if you look at the preaching of the apostles in the book of Acts, there's just a strong emphasis on Christ's resurrection as being, at the heart of everything and fundamental. And so what I meant was after, his resurrection and after their proclamation of that, they then looked at the cross and his life and interpreted all that he had done in the light of the resurrection. So, for example, his death, I don't think they would have understood it to be redemptive and salvific, as it were, if he was still in the grave. He had died and that was the end of it. And his word from the cross, "It is finished," for example, takes on a different meaning. Finished in the. If he is still dead, we'd say, "Wow, that's the end of
He is finished,
done," and he is finished. Whereas now, "It is finished" is the shout of a victor. More, it's it is accomplished. I finished. But all that makes sense only in the light of the resurrection. So that's kind of what I meant by they preached backwards, in the sense that they looked at his whole life, ministry, in the light, and it only now then makes sense.
Well, of course, that's good news for him. But how is that good news for us as well? There's the so what question.
The resurrection?
Yes.
Well, of course, one of the things that it does is that it does establish that he is Lord. The resurrection and the lordship and the divinity of Christ. It's good news because it helps us to really understand who Jesus is in that regard. And so I encourage pastors to call people on Easter Sunday when they preach to answer the question, who is Jesus, and to submit to him as Lord, because the resurrection establishes that. But I think the really good news about the resurrection is that it means that new creation has begun. That God's intent, because in the Jewish mind, resurrection from the dead was something they associated with the very end of the age, and that was when God was going to make all things new. They were a little bit confused and discombobulated, not because Jesus had been raised from the dead so much, but when it happened. It had happened in the middle of history, not at the end. And so they had to kind of readjust. But what that means is that new creation has already begun now. And so it's the guarantee that God's going to make all things new. And it means that that's begun now. It can begin in us. We are new creatures in Christ. But it's also about the whole of creation. And what it tells me is God is on a mission to redeem everything that he created. And I need to join him in that mission now.
Salvation is bigger than just me.
Absolutely, it's about the all of creation. And in fact, Paul writes in Romans chapter 8, I believe it is, that all of creation groans and travail. It's on tiptoe, waiting for. Now, when he returns, that's when new creation is really going to kick into full gear, as it were. But that process has begun now, and so the guarantee that's where we're going to go is already now. That's good news.
And it can also affect how we look at the creation around us now.
Right. We ought to be preparing this world ourselves for its eventual destiny, and that applies even to things like the environment. It leads to a Christian focus on creation, care, and that is because that's what God wants for all of creation. We need to kind of get on the road to that now.
After Jesus was resurrected, he ascended to heaven, and he sat at the right hand of the Father. What's he doing for us now?
Yeah. For a lot of people, the Ascension is a kind of a meaningless doctrine. They believe it. It's in the Apostles' Creed, and so forth. But first of all, what it meant for him was that you kind of have to ask what it means for him, and then you have to figure out what it means for us. But what it meant for him is that he's restored into the fullness of the presence of God once again, something that he kind of laid aside in some measure when he became incarnate. He was present at one place and in one time. He was limited by space and time when he walked here. Going back to heaven means that now he's in the fullness of the presence of God, and that means he can be everywhere and at all times at once now. He's no more limited. And the good news is that means that Jesus is always present now. He's everywhere. He said in the Great Commission, and don't forget, I'm with you always. And that's bound up with the Ascension, because you see, heaven and earth overlap, as it were, and heaven's all around us, as it were. It's more of a dimension than a place, okay? So Jesus can be everywhere, and that means, he's with us now, even as we're having this interview. He's with me as moment by moment, when I get in my car and drive home, and I can begin to recognize His presence and live in His presence every moment of every day. That is good news. That's just one thing.
Right. I was thinking of His ministry of mediation,
right,
as our intercessor.
Well, yeah. We're told that one of the main things He's doing now that He's at the right hand of God, He's not just twiddling His thumbs, but Hebrews says He ever lives to make intercession for us, and He's interceding at the right hand of God. This is a posture of sort of standing in the gap for others. And so if that's what Jesus is doing, and we are somehow connected to Him and joined with Him through union with Christ and through being raised up with Him, then we join with Him, in that work of intercession for others. And I think one of the things that Jesus does is He puts a bit of that intercessory burden that He has for everything on us as particular people, for particular persons, situations, countries, cities, churches, and so forth. And we then become these mediators, as it were. We join with Him in that work of intercession.
So the feelings that we have are really from Him,
right,
working in us.
Yes, yes. And it's amazing the different kinds of ministries and burdens. Out of those burdens, flow all kinds of different concerns and ministries that people have for particular things.
Now, the story of Jesus, we've kind of sketched out where it has gone now, but we also see something that in the future part of the story as His return.
Right.
Now, obviously, that's going to have a huge practical importance for us then, but does it have a practical importance for us now?
Well, if you read the New Testament, most of the discussion of the second coming and the return of Christ is really not about trying to figure out exactly when it's going to happen or even what it's going to look like when it happens. But most of the instruction and the teaching has to do with our lives now. So, for example, the call to holiness. He who has this hope, John says, purifies himself as He is pure. This hope of His return, it prompts us to become, like Him. We're going to become like Him.
If we like that,
yes,
then it's going to have some influence on what we do,
what we do now, exactly. So the call, it's a call to holiness, the second coming, and it's also a call to faithful service. The parables that Jesus tells about, the guy that goes away on a trip and the people are back home working and they don't know when he's coming. The ones that are said to be good and faithful servants are the ones that are just doing their job faithfully, waiting for His return. They're not trying to necessarily figure out exactly the day or the moment He's going to come back, but they're commended mainly because they were faithful in little, and now they're going to be faithful. So that there's a faithful service. There's also, I think, a call to patient endurance. I think it's in 1 Peter and James, for example, that you're waiting His return, but a day is like 1,000 years, and you don't know, and so you need to be patient. It's a spur to be patient, and then I would also say joyful confidence, because we know Jesus is coming back, and we're actually waiting for a person to come back most of all, aren't we? Sometimes we get so focused on the signs of his coming, but it's really the thing that's most exciting is that Jesus is coming. That word parousia that they used to talk about the second coming was a word that had to do with someone's personal presence, and so it's a reason for joy to know that Jesus, our risen Lord, will come back.
I think some people look forward to Christ's return, I don't know, kind of because they are interested in what he can do for me. I've got these problems in my life and I want them to be fixed, and that'll be fixed by Christ's return. So I want him to return. And they lose sight of the relationship with him. That
right.
He's the one we're waiting for.
Right.
And that's the big reason that it's going to be a joyful time. Right.
And I think that it's a kind of an indictment on us when many Christians don't talk much about the second coming. It seems like folks either overbelieve in it in the sense that that's all they think about, and they're always trying to, and most of the time they're trying to figure out dates and seasons and times and all that. Then in many sectors of the church, though, you just don't hear hardly anything at all about the second coming. And I think that actually shows you how little we really miss him. Because I think we'd talk more about it if we missed Jesus. We'd want to be with him. We'd want him to come back, because we'd want to see him again, just like we might talk about a loved one that's away, And so I wonder if that's an indictment on our love relationship with him.
That we need to be developing that relationship now.
That you'd want to, you'd be eager. It's the eager expectation, isn't it, in it of his return, and it's a blessed hope. It's a blessed hope that we have.
That is really interesting, but we are out of time, and so I thank you for being with us.
Yeah, it's great to be here.
Yeah, very good.
You've been watching You're Included, a production of Grace Communion International.